At 5 a.m. on a Tuesday morning, a woman walked out of her front door with a megaphone and a Bible. She was going to preach. By 6 a.m., she was dead. And to this day, nobody has been charged. For 6 years, she followed the same routine. Every morning before sunrise, while most of her neighborhood was still asleep, she stepped out of her front door, carrying a Bible and a megaphone. The streets were quiet, the air was cool, and for the next 30 minutes, she would walk through the darkness, preaching her faith to anyone willing to listen. Some people admired her, others were annoyed by her. A few wanted her to stop. Then the warnings began. People told her she was causing problems. People told her she was preaching in the wrong place. People told her she should stay away. For a short time, she listened. She stopped going out, but only for a week, because on the morning of July 9th, 2016, she picked up her Bible, grabbed her megaphone, and walked out the door again. 30 minutes later, she was dead. Her body was found lying in the street. Her Bible was still beside her. Her megaphone was still beside her. Nothing had been stolen. Nothing had been taken. Whoever attacked her had come for one reason. And nearly 10 years later, no one has ever been convicted of her murder. This is the story of Eunice Olawale and the disturbing questions that still surround her death. Long before her name appeared in newspaper headlines, Eunice Olawale was known for something much simpler: consistency. She was the kind of person who built her life around routine. Born on July 23, 1974, in southwestern Nigeria, Eunice grew up in a religious household where faith wasn't just something practiced on Sundays. It was part of everyday life. Her mother was an evangelist. Faith shaped the rhythm of the family. And as Eunice grew older, that commitment only deepened. By 2016, she was living in Kubwa, a densely populated district on the outskirts of Abuja, Nigeria's capital city. She was married to Pastor Olawale Elisha. Together, they were raising 7 children. 7. A household that size is never quiet. There were school schedules, meals to prepare, bills to pay, responsibilities everywhere. But according to people who knew her, Eunice never seemed overwhelmed by it. She was known as hardworking, reliable, deeply committed to her family, and deeply committed to her faith. Those two things defined her life: family and faith. Everything else came second. At her church, the Redeemed Christian Church of God, she served as a deaconess. But her religious work didn't stop when services ended. For years, Eunice had participated in a practice known throughout many Nigerian Christian communities as morning cry. The concept was simple: wake up before dawn, walk through the neighborhood, share scripture, pray, preach, encourage people to start their day with faith. For some residents, it was comforting. For others, it was noise before sunrise. Either way, people knew who she was. They knew her voice. They knew the sound of the megaphone. And they knew that before most of the city opened its eyes, Eunice Olawale would already be out on the streets. Every day, for 6 years. What nobody knew was that this routine was quietly becoming dangerous. Because while Eunice continued her morning walks, tensions were growing around her. At first, the comments seemed harmless. People disagreed with her message. People complained. People argued. But eventually, those comments became more specific, more personal, and more threatening. The people closest to her would later say that Eunice began hearing remarks about her preaching near a local mosque. Some suggested she should stop. Others suggested she shouldn't be there at all. The message was becoming clear. Certain people wanted her gone, and Eunice knew it. According to reports, she told her husband what she had been hearing. She wasn't ignoring the situation. She understood there was a problem. In fact, she stopped her morning cry for about a week. That alone suggests she took the warning seriously. But after that week passed, Eunice made a decision. She returned to the streets. Maybe she believed the tension had faded. Maybe she believed the warnings were just words. Or maybe she simply refused to let fear dictate her life. Whatever the reason, she resumed her routine. And for a brief period, everything appeared normal. Until the morning of July 9th. The morning everything changed. The night before the attack had been busy. There had been a church vigil, an all-night service. Like many church events, it stretched late into the night and into the early hours of the morning. Most people would have gone home exhausted. Most people would have slept in. Eunice didn't. Before dawn, she was awake, preparing for another morning cry. Inside the family home, nothing seemed unusual. Her husband remained in bed. Two of their sons left early to play football nearby. The neighborhood was beginning another ordinary Saturday. At around 5 a.m., Eunice stepped outside, Bible in hand, megaphone in hand, walking streets she had walked hundreds of times before. That is the last moment of certainty in this story. Everything that happened afterward must be reconstructed through witness statements, police reports, and the evidence left behind. At some point between 5 a.m. and 5:30 a.m., Eunice encountered her attackers. What happened during those 30 minutes remains unclear, but the result was devastating. She was stabbed. Her throat was cut. Witnesses later reported hearing screams. Some claimed they heard her crying out repeatedly, "Blood of Jesus," again and again, until the shouting stopped. By the time help arrived, it was over. The woman who had spent years walking those streets before sunrise was gone, and the scene left behind immediately raised troubling questions. Her Bible was still there. Her megaphone was still there. Her phone was still there. Nothing had been taken. No robbery. No apparent financial motive. The evidence pointed in one direction. Whoever attacked Eunice Olawale had not been looking for money. They had been looking for her. It didn't take long for the first people to notice something was wrong. In the early hours of July 9th, as the sun began to rise over Kubwa, residents were already moving through their usual Saturday routines. Some were heading to markets. Some were preparing breakfast. Others were simply stepping outside to begin the day. But near one quiet stretch of road, someone saw a figure lying motionless on the ground. At first, they thought she had fainted. Then they got closer and realized she wasn't moving at all. Panic spread quickly. A woman had been found on the street, blood on the ground, her belongings still beside her. Within minutes, neighbors gathered. Some screamed, some cried, some stood frozen, unable to process what they were seeing. Calls were made, voices overlapped, and slowly, the truth began to settle in. This was not an accident. This was not a collapse. Something violent had happened here. By the time authorities arrived, the area had already filled with people. The scene had shifted from quiet Morning Street to chaotic gathering point, and at the center of it all was Eunice Olawale. Still, unmoving, her morning routine had ended in the most irreversible way possible. Inside the family home, news did not arrive gently. It came in fragments. Then, all at once, a knock, a voice, then words no husband is ever prepared to hear. Eunice had not returned home. Something had happened. Her husband, Pastor Olawale Elisha, rushed toward the scene. What he found was every parent's and partner's worst nightmare. The street, the crowd, the confusion, and then the confirmation. According to witnesses, his reaction was immediate and overwhelming. Shock, disbelief, collapse into grief. A life built around routine, faith, and family had been broken in a single morning. 7 children had just lost their mother, and in the middle of it all, there were no answers, only questions. Who would do this? And why here? And why her? When investigators secured the area, the details began to take shape. Eunice had been attacked in the open. There was no sign of a struggle that extended far beyond the immediate location. No vehicle debris, no indication of theft. Her Bible remained close to her body. Her megaphone was still there. Her personal items were untouched. It was the kind of scene that immediately narrowed possibilities. This was not a robbery gone wrong. This was something else. Forensic teams documented the injuries. Witness statements were collected. And slowly, a timeline began to emerge between her leaving home and the discovery of her body. Only a short window of time had passed, roughly 30 minutes. 30 minutes that changed everything. But even as investigators worked, one fact stood out more than any other. There was no clear motive on the surface, and that made the case even more unsettling. Because when motive is unclear, suspicion spreads in every direction. In the first days after the killing, police began speaking to residents. Some said Eunice was well known. Others said she was controversial. Many mentioned her early morning preaching. And then came the more sensitive detail. Reports that she had received warnings in the weeks before her death. Warnings related to where she preached. Warnings about tension in the area. Police began tracing those claims. But early progress was slow. Witness accounts did not always align. Some heard shouting. Some heard nothing. Some were unsure of what they had seen in the early morning darkness. And in cases like this, uncertainty becomes its own obstacle. The investigation widened. People of interest were questioned. Community tensions were examined. But no immediate breakthrough came. As days turned into weeks, pressure began to build. Not just from the public, but from religious leaders, community members, and national observers who all wanted the same thing. Answers. Eventually, authorities made arrests. Several individuals were taken in for questioning in connection with the killing. Among those detained were members of the local community, including individuals from nearby religious circles. At this stage, however, it is important to note, no single version of events was universally agreed upon publicly. Some reports suggested confessions or admissions during interrogation. Other accounts disputed the circumstances under which those statements were made. What is clear is this. Investigators believed they had found possible links worth pursuing. But belief in a lead is not the same as proving a case. And as the investigation progressed, those early breakthroughs did not immediately resolve the central mystery. One of the most sensitive aspects of the case involved claims circulating in the aftermath of arrests. Some media reports at the time suggested that individuals questioned made statements implying involvement. However, these claims were never universally accepted as definitive proof in court proceedings. Legal processes continued, but the gap between public perception and legal certainty began to widen. And that gap created something powerful: confusion. Different narratives began to form. Some believed the case was close to resolution. Others believed key details were still missing, and that division would follow the case for years. As months passed, frustration grew. Why had there been no clear conviction? Why did the case stall? Why did conflicting accounts continue to surface? Critics pointed to investigative delays. Others pointed to the complexity of witness reliability in crowded urban environments. And some pointed to deeper issues: community tension, fear among witnesses, and the challenge of securing consistent testimony in emotionally charged cases. Meanwhile, the family continued to wait, waiting for closure, waiting for certainty, waiting for justice that still felt out of reach. Over time, several theories emerged. Some believed the attack was driven by local disputes over noise and early morning preaching. Others suggested religious tension may have played a role. A smaller number of voices argued it may have involved personal conflict that was never fully uncovered. But none of these theories fully answered every detail. Why was nothing stolen? Why was the attack so targeted? Why did it happen at that exact time, during a predictable routine? Each theory explained part of the story. None explained all of it. Even years later, the same questions remain. Who planned the attack? How many people were involved? Was this a spontaneous confrontation, or something more coordinated? And perhaps most importantly, why has no single version of events ever fully resolved into complete legal closure? For the family, these are not abstract questions. They are unanswered chapters of their lives. Eunice Olawale's morning routine was simple. Wake up, walk the streets, preach, return home. But on July 9th, 2016, that routine was interrupted in a way no one in her family could have imagined. What remains now is a case that continues to be discussed, debated, and examined. A life remembered for faith, a death still surrounded by uncertainty, and a story that, even years later, refuses to fully close. If you've watched this far, take a moment to think about how quickly ordinary routines can become the last moments of someone's life. Cases like this don't just live in archives or news reports. They live in families, in unanswered questions, and in streets where people still remember what happened that morning. If you want more true crime documentaries like this, subscribe and turn on notifications. Because some stories don't end when the news cycle moves on. Some stories stay open, long after the world stops talking about them.